Doctors, nurses, and hospital staff of Reddit, what are your experiences? Funny, sad, horrible, with people waking from anesthesia? NSW. A patient woke up from his wisdom tooth removal begging the doctor to let him be David Bowie. The doctor actually asked how that was supposed to happen, and the answer was that it would be fantastic. He then sang a pitch-perfect rendition of Space Oddity in an admirable Bowie impression, pee himself and passed out. Had a patient in for an endoscopy. As a matter of course, we place a speculum, think ball gag, but a metal ring instead of a ball, in the mouth through which to pass the scope so the patient doesn't bite the scope once they are under. We typically place it right at induction of anesthesia. This patient had the presence of mind to ask us what the safe word was before he lost consciousness as we placed the speculum. One of the rare times the whole aura erupted in laughter. Well, at least we know he's prudent. I once had a patient start totally trashing her sister, telling me how she has always been the black sheep of the family, is a scumbag and wants to bang her husband. She's just going off, and sitting in the doorway with the sister, the only one there to support her after surgery. You could tell it was crushing for her. This was probably an hour after the patient left PACU, conscious but still pretty whacked out. Yikes. I had a patient pet an invisible kitty that was named after me. The next day, was completely with it and was wondering what happened to that kitty. I think the patient wanted you to sit in their lap so they could pet you. I'm an anesthesia student currently doing my clinical rotations and I had an old guy wake up and the first thing he asked was, do I still have my balls, and I told him yep, both of them, and he said both, or you guys are great. I like to imagine he only had one ball and was thrilled to hear that you gave him a new one. Not a hospital staff, but my great grandfather had surgery one time and I was in the room when he woke up. He was a World War II veteran and was convinced that he was in a Nazi POW camp. He recognized me and told me I had to help him escape by killing the guards, nurses, because he knew I knew how to kill people. I was 16, obviously a trained killer. When the nurse came in, he was calm and kept motioning with his head at her to me and finally looked at me and said, kill her. Now, she always came back with another male nurse after that. Nurse here, this really big, hairy Turkish guy, whom I've never met before, told me how much he loved me and that he wanted to kiss me. I'm male BTW. He wanted to kiss you. My father-in-law was in a car accident that shattered his face, several vertebrae, and his pelvis. This isn't so much a story about what he said, but what he did. He was in a coma for 3 weeks, and had to be heavily restrained when coming out of it. He was a Marine in Vietnam. He was captured and escaped, and he still hated being restrained. My wife went to visit him on a Sunday, and the doctors told her that tomorrow he was going to be the first patient to use a new $30,000 restraint system that would cause him less discomfort. On Monday afternoon she visited again, and he was in the same restraints as before. My wife asked, and the nurse explained that he destroyed it restraint system. It lasted less than an hour. It wasn't salvageable. That's a bad butt right there. Not the doctor or the nurse. I had a lot of ear infections when I was younger, and my final time, I was about 7. I woke up to the Rugrats on a TV in the room. I hated the Rugrats at the time. Cue the following conversation. Me. Why are the Rugrats on? Doctor, you woke up earlier and said you wanted us to put on the Rugrats. We asked why, and you said that you hated the Rugrats and wanted to watch it so you could be angry. Me. Why did I want to be angry? Doctor, you said you wanted to be angry because you don't like being so happy all the time. Told to me by my wife, confirmed by the nurse. I was in bed, hospital room, waiting for surgery. They already gave me meds to calm me, but they knocked me out. 2 nurses come in to move me to a gurney, but they were small and I'm big, they can't move me over. My wife came over and poked me in the ribs saying, you're snoring, roll over, and I rolled right onto the gurney. Your wife is brilliant. Went straight from the ER to surgery to put a plate in my badly broken arm, so I hadn't been on a ward etc prior to the operation. Came out of surgery and recovery and was being pushed in a hospital bed to a ward. We turned into a ward and it was full of elderly people. I was in my early 20s. I turned to the hospital porter pushing me and shouted, sorry, we seem to have taken a wrong turn. We're in the morgue. Umfeo. I hope they didn't hear you. My first memory when waking up from shoulder surgery was a somewhat panicked nurse rummaging through the blankets at the bottom of my bed repeatedly muttering, "Where are his legs? Where are his legs?" I always cross my legs when I lay down, and apparently I must have done this as I was initially coming off the anesthesia. It freaked me out for a second, but then I processed what was going on. The nurse seemed relieved when I mumbled "they're right here" and nearly kicked her in the face when I extended my legs. What an odd thing to be saying out loud. Patient checking in. I was 18 and just had my appendix removed. My mum was at my bedside. I wake up in more pain from the operation than the appendicitis, and even worse, my balls are itchy. I'm wearing a hospital gown and I'm out of it, so I put my hand on my stomach and run it down to my skin so I can scratch my balls. Obviously not wearing underwear, and my hand runs down an excess of smooth skin. Then suddenly I'm touching my goods. I rummage around and come to the conclusion that someone has shaved my pubes. No one told me this would happen. I was livid. It's the height of visiting hours and I'm shouting in my broad Scottish accent, "AWW mum, they've shaved my pubes. I'm no happy about this. I want my pubes back. That's no right. No one told me about this. Get my pubes." My mother was mortified and she's trying to get me to calm down while laughing and trying to avoid a scene. They grew back in about 4 weeks, so it was no biggie, but at the time it was a serious issue. So I'm on a tech, and we have this regular that comes in all the time. She's an old black lady who has a lot of health issues, including dementia. This time, I'm actually not entirely sure why she was coming in, but whatever it was, she needed to be intubated. So we sedated her, put the tube in and did what we needed. When everything was finished, we called EMS to pick her up and take her back home. When they arrived, the nurse and I went in to prep her to leave. The lady is just starting to wake up from sedation. So, with the EMTs standing in the room, we take out her Foley catheter. Then, she queefs. The nurse and I smirk at each other, but this is fairly common and not the funny part. The funny part is that the noise seemed to surprise her, and apparently remind her what was going on, because she gasps and then looks over to the EMTs and says in an attempt at a sexy voice, "You boys ever seen a black coochie before?" Everyone in the room had to take a second to attempt to regain composure, but the EMTs ended up having to leave the room and the nurse is crouching on the ground trying not to die. Since I still have the Foley in my hands, don't have this freedom, and I'm forced to try to keep my sides from launching into orbit. It's since become a running joke around the air. No way, this literally happened to me. I was the paramedic taking her home, LOL. When my husband woke up from having his wisdom teeth surgically removed, his nurse was a rather large lady, like 350 plus. He looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You're too beautiful to be a nurse. You should have been a model. Why don't you just come home with me and my wife?" Yes, he was propositioning a three-way with a 50-year-old 350-pound nurse. Most awkward moment of my life. How nice that he wanted to include you though. I got my wisdom teeth out last month and was curiously subdued. My wife informed me, at least at the office. She loaded me up in the car and away we went. About halfway home, she called my mother to let her know that the surgery went well, and I remained stonily quiet. After she got off the phone, I demanded that my wife call my mother back. When she did so, I told her, "Mom, you have lots of dogs, and they need lots of love." Then I made the cut the call motion to my wife. When we arrived home, I was brought up short by my wife's pillowcase, which has a sloth on it. I asked out loud, "Honey, there's a frickin' sloth in here. How did we catch one? They're so fast." Then she tried to take my jeans off of me so I could go to sleep, and I yelled, "Whoa there, missy," when she grabbed for the fly. All in all, a pretty great morning. They're so fast, LOL. When I was 14, I had eye surgery. Coming out of anesthesia, the nurses asked me if I could remember my name. I slurred. "My name is Worcestershire sauce." "No, wait, that's not a cool name. My name is Shark." I can't even pronounce Worcestershire completely sober. Impressive. Wish I was earlier to this one. My fiancée recently had her tonsils removed. Her mother and I were there when she woke up. After a few minutes, she told her mother, "Now that I've got my tonsils out, I can fit more of his dong in my mouth." It was awkward. I am so glad I made it down to this one. When I got my wisdom teeth out, I apparently called my Middle Eastern surgeon a sly Arabian tooth thief after coming to. That was fun to learn about when I regained mental clarity. Dying. Glad I scrolled this far down. I had surgery on my wrist and came out of anesthesia screaming my balls hurt. The doctor came in and asked what was wrong. I said my balls hurt. He replied, dude, you had wrist surgery. No one touched your balls. 2 stories. 1. I had a lady in her 70s who drank martinis and took Xanax all day, every day, so she had such a strong tolerance to the sedation I was giving her that she just totally stopped breathing while still awake. I had to say, ma'am, I'm going to have to bag you now, and she mouthed okay, and I put the ambu bag on her face and force breathed for her until she got her respiratory effort back. 2. I was in helping with a heart procedure and the patient went into complete heart block and his heart stopped beating. I hop up to the table and start chest compressions while they are hurriedly trying to put in a temporary pacing wire. I had an arterial pressure waveform on the monitor, so I could see exactly how hard to do the compressions, and the man never lost consciousness. So I'm doing chest compressions on a dude while he looks right at my face the whole time. So it was like press sorry for about 2 minutes until the pacing wire was in place. That's amazing. Both stories. I was the patient. I'd had all 4 wisdom teeth out at once, and I woke up earlier than expected in recovery, early enough that they hadn't taken out the wadding at the back of my mouth meant to absorb the blood. So I woke up, immediately felt like I was choking, and panicked. I leapt off the bed, and a bunch of nurses came to restrain me. Still out of it, I fought them and definitely gave one of them a good punch before they got me back on the bed. I passed out again straight away. Still feel bad about it. Poor nurse. Came out of anesthetic and the lead nurse decides it's time to tell me all about post-op care. She says, now this is going to be a pain in the butt. And I said, if that's the case, then you guys performed the wrong procedure, it was a nose operation. The assistant nurse started laughing. Lead nurse not so amused. Not a doc or nurse. When I got my wisdom teeth out, they strapped my arm down for the IV anesthetic. Apparently, before passing out, I looked up at the white-haired German dentist and said in my best Connery, Goldfinger, do you expect me to talk? The dentist didn't reply, but he did tell me after surgery that it was one of the funniest things anyone asked him in a haze. No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to sleep. Not a doctor. A friend was in a car crash. Pretty bad, he was in a coma for 2 months. He had a female doctor. For 2 months until he came out of his coma, every time his doctor was checking on he would reach up and grab her breast, guessing he heard her voice. When we told him about, he did not believe us. So he asked her and she confirmed it. Said she never stopped him because it seemed to keep him calm. That doctor deserves a medal. I was the patient, but I think this qualifies. Colonoscopy. In this big lounge chair, still half asleep in recovery, I half roll over and let rip the biggest fart in history. The devil himself created this one. I open half an eye at a nurse. Ask, was that me? Jaw on the ground, she nods and I go back to sleep. You have to fart after the colonoscopy or they don't let you go home. I was working in the pediatric and sedating a skater kid 14 or 15. We are talking more a wannabe suburban kid rather than a punk. Kinda kid that obviously joined a frat in college. His mom is there in the room as he starts waking up once we had his wrist set and in the cast. His mom is typical well-to-do suburban mom who spends lots of time at yoga and PTA meetings, that is. Not trashy at all, and family was likely from a well-to-do part of town. My buddy, who is fairly hairy on his arms etc, reached across his upper chest to grab an IV line. Kid was half asleep, raised his head up with his eyes still closed and licked my buddy's arm with this exaggerated lick like it was an ice cream cone. Kid flops his head back onto the pillow and his mom just looks mortified in the 2-3 seconds that pass before he slurs out, "Man, I sure do love to lick some pee." His mom immediately turned bright red and walked out of the room, and we all busted out laughing except the guy who got licked. The doc was this young petite girl and she said she peed herself a little, she was laughing so hard. For months we would give that guy lick motions in the air when we passed him in the hall and putting Rolling Stone stickers on his locker etc. I still give him crap about that from time to time. My favorite is to catch him chatting or something standing at the desk and to lean over and sniff his forearm and ask if he has been fishing. Sniff his forearm and ask if he has been fishing. And this is the comment that killed me. No more sides. Not a nurse, but I have a good one. It's been 15 years and I'm still horrified when I think about it. I have to preface this story by saying that I have a super conservative, girl next door type of personality. I am shy, somewhat of an introvert, and most definitely never want to be the center of attention on purpose. I went in for a colonoscopy with a yum juice that made me forget everything that happened, although I vaguely remember talking and hearing laughter. When I woke up, people were smirking and glancing at each other, trying to suppress their laughter. I asked if something happened and the staff reassured me that everything was good. So when the doctor came in to talk to me before I was released, I asked him if something funny had happened. He reassured me that I had a very normal procedure and then told me that sometimes the medication caused people to lower their inhibitions, but that the effect wore off very quickly, as does the medication. I asked him what he meant by lowering their inhibitions and he paused again and reassured me that it happens to a lot of people. So yeah, I spent my entire colonoscopy talking dirty to my doctor and his tools. I never went back to that doctor again. TLDR. Yum juice made me say dirty things to the doctor, change doctors and considered moving out of state due to my humiliation. Till Dr. Tools get more action than I do. I had to get hardware installed in my leg for a nasty bone break at an overseas base. A few days later, my buddy and I were having lunch on base. A group of women came in and sat down at the table next to us and we struck up a conversation. One of them asked what I had gotten done. I was in a huge cast and on crutches. I tell her the procedure. She gets a funny look on her face and asked when it was done. I tell her the date. She immediately starts laughing and tells her friends, "This is the guy." Now they're all howling with laughter. It took a while to tell the story because they're in tears from laughing. Apparently, when I was coming out of sedation, I grabbed a corpsman's butt and hung on for dear life. The woman I was currently talking to at the restaurant. I just wanted to crawl into a hole when I heard the story. TLDR. Grabbed a girl's butt in the OR. Got named Asman by the staff, and became the talk of the hospital for a while. Edit. My top comment is how I perved on some poor woman when I was out of my good on drugs. Wonderful. Additional edit. Thank you for the gold. Now I just have to figure out what to do with it. Can I redeem it for Bitcoin? Trade it for beer, perhaps? Hey everybody, the Asman's in town. I was the patient, but I had to get 5 teeth pulled. The nurse was helping my mom shuffle me to the car. I turned to thank her, but couldn't get my mouth to work, so I bowed and doffed an imaginary cap. Anesthesia. My BFF had a vasectomy and when he was first given the drugs 3 nurses walked in that were rather attractive. He looks up with his wife in the room and says if I would have known there was going to be hot women in here, I would have worn my big dong. I've had a vasectomy, so this one is especially funny to me since they usually only use localized numbing agents. Unless he got a special doctor, that comment was 100% him. Once I woke up asking if the ends justify the means. Once I went under while reminding all the women in the room that the room is very cold and they shouldn't judge. Not a doctor or nurse. When my sister was 16, she had back surgery to repair a ruptured disc in her lower back. Apparently, the meds that they gave her before she was put under gave her low enough inhibitions that instead of counting backward from 10, she started belting out the lyrics to Roxanne. The OR staff later told my mom that not only were they amazed that someone that young knew the lyrics, that the way that she started singing was one of the funniest things they had seen in an OR. Okay, starting on my left with 1. Your number comes up, you go. After waking up from my wisdom tooth surgery, I remember asking my mom I didn't fart. Did I? I had a bunch of gas before the surgery and now it's gone. I hope I didn't fart in front of the cute nurse. A cute nurse is behind me during the whole speech. Welp. Plot twist. That's the nurse's fetish. I woke up in a recovery room after having my wisdom teeth out and no one was in there with me, so I thought it would be a good idea to get up and have a look around. Apparently I had been awake a minute before and asked the doctor for some water, but when she left to get it I went in and out of consciousness and forgot all about it. They were pretty terrified when I just up and vanished. A few months later my brother had his wisdom teeth out. We left the surgeons with no issue, but on the drive home my brother lost his crap. I had to take a circuitous route home because my brother wanted to see the circus. Every house we drove past he was pointing out imaginary animals and giggling hysterically. He was 17 at the time. Anesthesia apparently does weird crap to us. I've been under anesthesia several times over the last 3 years, and no, I'm not a doctor or nurse either. The most recent time however, I went in for an outpatient procedure where a stent was placed into ureter, tube that leads to kidney. They go through your dong to put it in, hence the anesthesia. Anyhow, it took more than the normal dose to put me under and my wife later told me that when I came to, I was playing with my dong and asking her if she wanted to take a ride to make sure this thing still works before we get out of here. The nurse was there at the time also. My wife told me she attempted to keep me covered for the nurse's sake, but I wasn't having it. I've no recollection of those events. Don't worry, OP. The nurse has seen smaller. I work on a floor full of patients post-surgery. One of my favorite patient comments was someone fresh from the PACU, post-anesthesia care unit, who looked straight at me and said, "You put a bag on my whiner, didn't you?" referring to his catheter. His mom and I were in stitches. It made a surgery that went longer and worse than expected a little bit happier. Not a professional, medical or otherwise, but on the way home from the dentist I was gone and something in my mind remembered Metal Gear Solid and I started yelling the Qui-Ida la snake. Apparently I almost caused my mom to crash the car and it quickly became annoying very fast as one could imagine. My fiance is a fanatic of Metal Gear Solid. I'd imagine this would be him if he had to be under anesthesia. I'm not a doctor nurse, but I heard about this after my wisdom teeth surgery. I apparently was still on anesthesia, and when they wheeled me out I had both arms stuck out and was making plane noises. They asked me what I was doing and I told them I was becoming my final form of a plane. Still do not know why I was doing it. Just coming out of surgery and the nurse says, "I'm going to take your temperature now," to which I respond, "Will you give it back?" Was the patient in this one. When I was 12 I had heart surgery and was getting wheeled down to the operating room. I was completely transfixed on my knee when I then asked a nurse if I could pet the kitty. She said sure, so I started petting and scratching my knee going AWW, good kitty kitty. When I woke up from that surgery I spent about 5 days in anesthetic heck, like a medically induced coma but not quite as severe, and cussed out every nurse that asked me how I was doing. I was intubated so I had to scratch out my hatred onto scrap paper and hope they could translate it. When I was off of the cocktail they were giving me I was back to my cheerful self and felt mortified about calling the pretty nurses working the ICU ward at Children's Hospital a bunch of stupid c. Apparently it happens all the time but I still cringe when I think about it. As an EMT who deals with the nurses at Children's, that might explain some of their surliness. 3 times. The first time when I was 5, tonsil surgery. My family is from Norway, and my grandmother always kept a pewter model of a longboat on her mantle. Just to explain why a 5-year-old would wake up screaming, "Get me back to the longboat," and then apparently, to quote my mother, go all Linda Blair on the doctors when they came in to try to give me antibiotics. That was nearly 25 years ago and my family still likes to joke about me managing to shriek my head off and throw punches after having just come out of throat surgery. By age 13, I'd tamed down some, and apparently only muttered angrily at everyone while waking up. Age 26, all the fight had gone out of me, and I just cried whenever a nurse asked me a question. "How is your pain? Not bad. I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry. Can you sit up for me?" Uncontrollable sobbing. "Okay then, let's get you some apple juice." Fully disconsolate. Got my wisdom teeth out 2 weeks ago and all I could do was cry. I tried sitting there focusing on not crying, but every time my dad looked at me I started to bawl, and when the doctor asked me how I was doing I burst into tears and laughed at the same time. In 91 I had my appendix out, but there was a complication. Instead of being inflamed and ready to burst, they found my appendix dead and shriveled. The poison in my appendix had drained to my lymph nodes in the center of my stomach. The doctor doing the surgery had to feel around to find where to make the second incision. Problem is that I was in the operating room for so long I built up a tolerance to the anesthesia that I woke up. As I started to sit up with 2 huge holes in my stomach, all hands came out of me and a nurse forced my head down, making me look at the ceiling. I thought this was a dream from the meds they gave me, but my doctor later confirmed that this actually happened. The anesthesiologist decided to up the dosage on the anesthesia to an adult level, then double an adult level, and I finally fell back asleep. Because of the high dosage they gave me, my arms and legs twitched and I almost turned over on my side with 2 huge holes in my stomach. They had to grab straps and strap me down to the bed, including my head. I do not remember it, but the doctor, who was my family doctor until the day he died, told me that I woke up 3 more times during the operation, and one time I saw my open wounds and freaked the heck out. After that they strapped my head to the table. The anesthesiologist refused to give me any larger dosages of the meds because he was at the danger levels for an adult. I was a child and it was not working on me. Ever since then I have had to be prescribed large dosages of anything or it will not work. Dental work has to be done with both a local and gas as well. Because of this, with the exception of heartburn meds and antibiotics, medicine is something I usually do not take because it does not work on me well unless I take illegal doses. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.